Okay, so for this week's lecture, we're talking about film and transmedia storytelling. We'll start by talking about the film genre, the production, and distribution. And then in the second half of the lecture, we'll talk about transmedia storytelling, franchising, and intellectual property rights. But as always, the main points I want to get across to you today in terms of lessons we can learn from film is that as producers, planning is essential. You need to be meticulous, you need to be precise. You need to monitor the progress and ensure on time, on budget completions. As producers, you'll also want to reduce risk where you can so that you can instill confidence in your investors. Also, the management of intellectual property rights is essential, especially when it comes to managing franchises and leveraging an audience's connection to a narrative. Okay, so let's dive into talking about film. So let's start with this quote from Vogel. He says, "Snuggled comfortably in the seat of your local theatre, or, as is increasingly likely, in front of the screen attached to your home video exhibition device, you are transported far away by your imagination as you watch." He continues to say that what is seen on the screen is there because of a remarkable history of tumultuous development that is still largely in progress. What developments then is Vogel talking about in his quote? He's referring to the impact of technological advancements within filmmaking, from the addition of sound to color and technicolor, special effects and stunt work, and computer-generated images. The point is that film has always been a visual medium, which has had to innovate in this capacity to keep audiences coming back. This is especially important when there are more entertainment options available to audiences, and therefore more competition for the film industry. Okay, so now let's talk about genre and ask ourselves, why is it important? Genre is a category defined by a mix of aesthetic, style, and story. And in this way, it helps to manage audience expectations. For example, audiences learn about different genres as they encounter more and more films. This experience and knowledge of genres helps them to prepare for what to expect when a film is marketed or labeled in the press or reviews. So genres tell us a number of things. For example, it might tell us about how predictable a story arc would be, the narrative, or what the character archetypes or stereotypes will be. A prime example here is Disney's latest Beauty and the Beast live-action film. Because we know about the fairy tale genre, and Disney movies can also be counted as a genre, the audience knows what to expect. It will be family friendly, it will involve some fantastical elements, and there will be a strong focus on music as well. So, genre helps audiences to manage their expectations and provides information that factors into their choice of whether they see it in the cinema or wait for it at home. So by knowing how an audience understands genres, producers can cater for a specific audience that expects something from a certain genre. In the entertainment industries, it's hard to know what creative ideas or content audiences will like. Therefore, entertainment is risky, uncertain, and volatile business. And as such, it is important to create or find audiences and sustain their loyalty. So think about it for a moment. What elements would you expect from an action film versus a horror film versus a drama? However, certain films have the potential to redefine a genre or even create a new one. For example, here we have two hybrid films, Shaun of the Dead, which is a horror comedy. And on the right here, we've got Alien, which can be interpreted as a sci-fi thriller or a sci-fi horror. With The Dark Knight, we have an action crime. And with the Ghostbusters, we have another horror comedy or a supernatural comedy. So by playing around with audiences' expectations and creating hybrid genres, you are able to, or you have the opportunity to, redefine or create new markets and audiences and their tastes and expectations. Let's talk for a short moment about film budgets. The size of the budget makes an impact on your choice to see a movie. It contributes to the aesthetic and becomes part of the genre or the expectation of audiences. For example, Oscar bait movies are often independent films with small budgets like Lion and Moonlight. Films can be classified in terms of their budget, so you have independent films which have a budget of less than 20 million like Lion, like Manchester by the Sea. And then you have films like La La Land, which sits somewhere in between independent and blockbuster. And on the blockbuster end, we have films that are upwards of 100 million. It turns out that Avengers Infinity War will roughly be around 400 million in budget. Previous to that, it would have been Pirates of the Caribbean's On Stranger Tides, around 350 million as the most expensive movie ever made. So many movies that go through the development phase. So the way a movie begins is through the generation of an idea, and then the creation of a story or a script, along with a sizzle reel or a proof of concept short. The best way to explain a sizzle reel is that it is like a trailer for your film, but instead of shooting or actually creating scenes from your film, what you do is borrow existing music and footage from other films and cut it in a way that it represents the feel and look of the movie you're going for. The proof of concept short, on the other hand, is where you'll go through the process of filming and creating your own trailer. So a proof of concept is an actual sample of the creative vision. Now let's stop for a moment and ask ourselves, why are sizzle reels and proof of concept trailers important? The answer is that they are important tools for pitching your film to investors. It will ensure that the producers and investors, so those that handle the finance and the distribution, understand the creative vision and have the same end product in mind. You'll also need to gather interest from potential talent, such as big name directors and lead actors. Why might you do this? It's so that if you have the talent signed up in the early stages of the project, you'll be able to convince investors of the film's profitability. And it will also help to reduce the perceived risk any stakeholders might have. In addition, having well-known stars helps audiences to understand the type of movie to expect. It could also attract fans of the directors, cinematographers, actors, or actresses. Now, one example of a movie that did not leave development was the Halo movie. It was planned as an adaptation of the original Halo game from 2001, which featured movie-style stories within an interactive platform. It had potential because it was an intense sci-fi action. It had potential because it contained intense sci-fi action. There was a new universe for film audiences to explore with an expansive mythology and storyline, with a dedicated fan base, which already existed. Microsoft's pitch process involved sending wildly theatrical packages to garner support. Actors were dressed as the character Master Chief and delivered the script to studio heads. However, it did not have much impact because the Halo franchise was already well known within Hollywood, and studios were already predisposed to wanting to make this film or not. With the pitch, Microsoft was highly aggressive in the terms that they set out. They were asking studios for $10 million to option or lay by the rights until they can pay full price when the movie was ready to move into production, and then they asked for 15% of gross revenue of the film sales. They also demanded 60 first-class plane tickets for Microsoft employees to attend the premiere. In addition, they wanted to retain all intellectual property rights, so that meant no merchandising for the studios, and they wanted to control all aspects of the production, including the director and cast. In the early development phase, Universal and Fox both signed on. Peter Jackson's Weta Workshop managed to produce test props and shot test reels. However, when the studios sought more control over the intellectual property and merchandising, the deal was pulled by Microsoft. However, movies often do get out of development hell. Hacksaw Ridge spent 14 years in development, and there were issues with convincing the inspiration behind the film, Desmond Doss, to tell his story. Another problem arose when the initial studio who was funding the production wanted it to be PG-13, and this rating did not work for the creative team as it ended up becoming an R-rated production, and it also meant they needed to finance the film independently. Speaking of the process, David Permit, the producer of Hacksaw Ridge, said that a producer has to be impervious to rejection. I think in life we all need to be impervious to rejection, and all you need is one yes in a sea of no's. He continues to say, "When I speak at various universities, I always tell young producers not to try to anticipate what people are going to like or what they're not going to like, because nobody knows. I'm not always right. I've made movies that have done well. I've made movies that haven't done well. The most important thing is to be impervious to rejection. Go with your heart and really focus on the story." He continues and says, "When you have something that you believe in, that you have conviction in, you don't give up. You stay with it. 16 years is not the longest of the projects that I've had. I have some projects that go back 20 years that I'm still working on, as I'm sitting here on the phone with you right now." And finally, he states, "In the movie business, it's always like pushing boulders up mountains. Every movie that gets made is a miracle. It's a very uniquely complex and difficult task to make a movie. It all starts with a good idea." Once a film project secures funding, they're ready to move into pre-production. Let's stop for a minute and have a guess at what sorts of things and tasks need to happen in this phase, and then we'll discuss it in a moment. One of the things that needs to happen at this point in time is that you need to hire cast and crew. So you'll need to check availability, especially with larger or bigger stars who have multiple shooting commitments on different projects. You'll also need to factor in time for reshoots later on. Any casting sessions that are held during this time are recorded for the studio so that it will instill confidence in their investment. Also, only a portion of the script is used to avoid the full leak of the script. One of the other major things that needs to happen at this point in time is that you need to work out the story and then break it down into parts. You need to think about the location, the days of which you will shoot, make sure the director rehearses with the cast to brief them on the creative vision, prepare a storyboard, which is a visualization of the film aesthetic and the concept. It also acts as a quick basic reference tool for certain camera movements. And Pixar is known for being one of the companies that is the best at storyboarding. The storyboard helps to drive and guide the creative vision and feel, and always acts as a reference point throughout the production. You could easily sell the artwork from the storyboards along with portions of the script and package them together to create a book. When it comes to location scouting, you need to keep in mind what the script needs versus what is available to you. For example, for the movie Black Hawk Down, You could not shoot in Somalia, so an alternative had to be found, which was Morocco. You might also need to factor in your budget. For example, there might be tax incentives in other parts of the world that will make it cheaper for you to film there. So these tax incentives are essentially reimbursements or cashbacks from the government. You might also need to think about redressing certain spaces to fake the look and feel of what you're going for. During the pre-production phase, you'll need to create a tentative schedule. When you're creating this schedule, you'll have to balance your creative options and choices with the budget and time that you have. And it is for this reason that films are often not shot sequentially or chronologically as you see them in the movie, because it is not cost or time effective. The objective when planning your schedule here is to minimize the number of setups or bump-ins that you have, ensuring that you will optimize the time and budget per setup. You'll also need to ensure that the teams and tasks for each team are established early and clearly. You might also need to consider if major scenes need to be shot early so that they can feed into trailers and generate audience interest in advance. You'll also need to consider how to get the word out to potential audiences about the film and keep them updated on the progress. Throughout the pre-production phase, the director will handle the creative decision, the script, casting, and visual style, along with the director of photography. The producer, on the other hand, will be concerned with budgeting, scheduling, and hiring key personnel, organizing shooting locations and logistics, as well as set construction. Together, though, they need to decide how will the film look, where will the film be shot, and what will the time frame for filming be. Both the director and producer support each other and need to stay synchronized, as they will both be held accountable for the film's success. While the director is responsible for the creative decision, a producer can influence this creative vision. However, it really depends on the roles and the relationships between the two. Once the film leaves pre-production, it is ready to be shot. Let's stop for a moment and ask ourselves, what is the most important job for producers to do during production? The answer is that the producers will need to maintain any schedules formed in the pre-production phase. They'll need to ensure the progress with principal photography, which is the actual filming or shooting of certain scenes. And they'll need to monitor the process, because it is about keeping your finger on the pulse of the project. And at the same time, they need to manage the actual production budget, making sure it will not run over budget. Throughout the production phase, you'll also need to be prepared for any unforeseen circumstances, such as death or injury during shooting. If this occurs, you'll need to consider rescheduling, reshooting, script rewrites, rebuilding or redesigning the film itself. So for example, while Carrie Fisher did complete all her scenes for Star Wars Episode 8, for Episode 9, the production team will need to reconsider and rewrite this script. Now, in terms of Paul Walker's death in The Fast and Furious 7, the crew could have scrapped the production and taken the insurance money, but instead they chose to work with what they had and made alterations to the script, which worked out in their favor. During the post-production phase, the film is touched up and polished, ready for distribution. So the film will be edited with reference to the original storyboards. It will have visual effects and computer generated images added. Not only do the visuals need to be edited, but also the sound. The film will need to be scored, or a soundtrack will need to be compiled. So sound effects for explosions are put into place. Any audio which contains dialogue from the actors on set, which is not of a high quality, will need to be redone, often with the actor watching themselves and listening to the original audio and then having to emulate or repeat a number of different takes until the right one is found to drop into the scene. Essentially, this ensures that the film will have clean audio from the actors. Once the film is ready, It will be shown at film festivals, which are often used as market tests, particularly indie films. This process is crucial for studio executives, as they will provide feedback and give the producer or the director notes on any changes they feel need to happen. So for example, the third act in Brad Pitt's movie World War Z changed from being set in Moscow to the UK. Now the film is ready for theatrical distribution, and in its first month, it will generate an estimated 95% of its total box office revenue. Let's take a quick detour here and look at how technology has impacted on the film industry. So in the 1950s, the introduction of black and white TV saw cinema admissions decline steeply. In the 1960s, color TV was introduced and many theaters at the time closed down. In the 1970s, you start to see the film industry fight back by beginning to create blockbuster movies such as Jaws and anything that had come out of the movie brats such as George Lucas or Steven Spielberg. You also see the well-known space opera, also known as Star Wars, emerge during this time. However, there is another complication in terms of the introduction of video recording devices. In the 1990s, we had the rise of the multiplex, multiple cinema screens in one location. But then in the 2010s, the dominance of majors is challenged by independent internet video distribution services, such as Netflix. Let's stop for a moment and ask ourselves, what trends do we see happening here? And then we'll come back and run through some of those answers. So what we see here is that technological advances diminish potential cinema audiences as they shift towards other entertainment options, such as color TV and home cinema, due to the fact that it is more convenient, practical, and comfortable from within their homes. Now, for a moment, let's talk about films within the context of home entertainment. Here, films can be sold directly to the consumer through physical formats such as Blu-rays or DVDs. They often follow the theatrical release or they go straight to DVD. By 1986, studios actually generated more revenue from home video than the theatrical window itself. The home entertainment window also allowed movies such as Reservoir Dogs to find new audiences and capture more revenue. This is important to the film industry as it is a second opportunity. Home entertainment is important to the film industry as it is a second opportunity to generate revenue through rentals or through those who wanted to collect the film in a physical format. It also meant that films that were not a commercial success at the cinemas, such as Reservoir Dogs, could also potentially pick up and grow a cult following through home entertainment. However, as time went on, physical media was killed by the digital age. So Blockbuster actually had the opportunity to buy Netflix in the early 2000s. However, they were ignorant to their trends, and they were late to the party in terms of setting up services where you could send DVDs through the mail or have rental kiosks. Now, I'm pretty sure in front of the Kelvin Grove Woolies there is a Blockbuster vending machine, and I don't know if anyone uses it. Now, the bricks and mortar business model of rental video places like Blockbuster and Video Easy only worked and were only profitable when they could provide a wide variety of titles with several copies at the right locations for the right price. However, Netflix and other services have blown that away. So as I was mentioning before, the theatrical windows were important for the film industry. So where they would generate only 20% of total revenues at the cinema, they would have around 40% through the home video window, and another 40% when networks bought the rights to air the films to their audiences. However, as ticket sales have diminished, the film studios are now also dependent on revenue from licensing and merchandising. So one could argue that the film itself helps to build the entertainment brands, the entertainment franchises. They act as the theatrical advertisement for the franchise itself, and as such, it is important that the quality, story, and meaning of the film or franchise caters to the audience. So here we see the revenue generated through the theatrical window and the home entertainment window. But now you have a number of auxiliary sources, such as the video game tie-ins, theme park, merchandise, and Broadway tie-ins as well. Or rather than tie-ins, entertainment, which is branded under the entertainment banner. So for example, Star Wars The Force Awakens made $1.65 billion in international box office sales. However, they made $5 billion through its merchandise and $500 and $700 million from each of its video games. So my question to you is, why do we see more expansion of entertainment franchises compared to original content? Stop for a moment and write down some ideas, and then we'll discuss them when we come back. So some of the answers may be that studios are looking for reliable, tried and tested content or stories that have a proven history of commercial success with audiences. Films that are adaptations, spin-offs of, or prequels or sequels are designed to leverage the loyalty of the audience to an existing creative idea or narrative. In this way, audiences are already familiar with the characters of that universe, or that brand, or that franchise. It is also somewhat due to the global financial crisis, which made stakeholders in the film industry warier of which projects they invested their money into. They want to ensure return on investment and a steady stream of income, or guaranteed income rather. It should also be noted that Disney is one of the largest entertainment conglomerates in the world. For example, they own Marvel Studios and the Star Wars franchise, two of the biggest entertainment brands around today. When we talk about entertainment franchises, it's also important to talk about IP rights. Stop for a moment and write down what you think IP rights are and why it is important to know. So IP rights are the rights to creative ideas and content. Companies who hold the IP rights license or sell them to independent parties who want to create content, but they often do so with certain directions or limitations set out by the rights holders. This is because the rights holders want to ensure consistent and familiar quality of the content for their existing audiences. Companies like Disney are comfortable with licensing out their rights because they deal with brands that are already often well established. So any franchise extension should presumably generate a return on investment. Remember that at the start of the lecture, we discussed how entertainment is risky business because it's uncertain which ideas will work. We discussed that one way companies survive is by catering to genres and audience expectations. Another way they survive is through vertical or horizontal integration. So horizontal integration simply means that companies buy out their direct competition and dominate the field of play. For example, one film studio would be acquiring another one. The name of the game here is Monopoly, and it means that the customers who require these services are forced to choose from a few providers. Vertical integration, on the other hand, means that a company will take certain measures to control every step of development and distribution of their content. For example, we live in an era where film studios have evolved into global entertainment companies. Disney, for example, once a film studio specializing in animation, has since expanded into television, magazine publishing, music, theme parks, and more. Although this raises operating costs across their multiple business units, they have more control over their intellectual property. But it also means they can utilize synergies, such as cross-promoting their products across multiple content and services that they own. This is a tactical advantage, as film studios have to compete with alternative forms of entertainment which lured audiences away from their cinema screens. Having multiple forms of content and services allows them to sustain their engagement with these fragmenting audiences. A new form of leveraging these synergies and franchises is through transmedia storytelling. So while we're talking about franchise extensions, I think it's important to understand current trends in entertainment franchises. So transmedia storytelling is not new. It is a current buzzword that relates to the evolution of entertainment franchises. However, it is argued to be a little more strategic when it comes to narrative and storytelling. The phrase transmedia storytelling was originally coined by Henry Jenkins. However, he was one of several academics that worked on concepts that were arguing highly similar things. He argues that transmedia storytelling is a process where integral elements of a fiction get dispersed systematically across multiple delivery channels for the purpose of creating a unified and coordinated entertainment experience. Ideally, each medium makes its unique contribution to the unfolding of the story. In other words, transmedia storytelling is used to describe how audiences come to experience elevated levels of enjoyment when they come into contact with various and multiple elements of an entertainment franchise. However, this isn't a static or concrete definition because it is evolving and changing as transmedia producers experiment with this form of storytelling across multiple entertainment experiences. One example of transmedia storytelling, although it is an older example, is the Matrix film franchise, which was expanded into animated shorts and a video game. Each of those elements held unique insights into the mythology of the Matrix. The Animatrix provided more details on the history behind the Matrix, and the games provided more detail on subplots that weren't fully explained in the 3 films. So let's take a closer look at the characteristics of transmedia storytelling. So any element within a transmedia franchise should be able to be somewhat understood or enjoyed without having to have experienced another one. In other words, it should be able to be consumed as a standalone piece of content. However, this means that any elements can become a potential entry point for audiences into that franchise. So each element within the transmedia story attempts to provide a unique experience that informs an audience's overall enjoyment or understanding of the franchise. For example, by experiencing 2 different elements of a transmedia story that are linked but provide different experiences or details of it, audiences can experience a heightened level of detail of the overall universe or narrative compared to if they had only experienced one. One thing to point out about transmedia storytelling is that it is not just an adaptation of content from one media platform or entertainment experience to the next. However, they can be an attempt to expand a given franchise into more revenue streams. What this means is that the design of the transmedia story might not be well developed and the different elements aren't as strategically integrated regarding the narrative. Transmedia stories create potential for audiences who have more transmedia experiences to claim a mastery of the overall franchise. They can then use this knowledge as a marker of social status amongst their like-minded peers. At transmedia storytelling's heart, producers are leveraging the emotional ties the audience has developed for an idea to sustain audience engagement and loyalty. So I've given you The Matrix as an example of a transmedia story. Now it's your turn to identify an example yourself. Consider the following questions. What are the elements? And why or why isn't the overall franchise successful? Ask yourself, how would audiences experience the transmedia story overall versus if they only came into contact with one element? You might have thought, well, what if there are franchises where the elements within aren't strategically linked together as a complete narrative? Let's use the Marvel Cinematic Universe as an example here. To understand the story and character in the Avengers film, audiences need to have some knowledge of the other films and the characters: Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America. Now, some subplots that aren't given much development in that film are explained in the TV series Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. However, a new Marvel video game in development with Square Enix will offer fans original stories that do not strictly follow the intended narrative of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and its canon. In short, it's not following the rules that bind the stories in the Marvel Cinematic Universe together in a coherent and codependent way. Now, my argument is that although the game isn't intended to be connected to the film or TV show, audiences will translate their understanding of either of those elements onto each other. So let me run through some examples of transmedia experiences outside of film. So music from the band is linked to the graphic novels called The Armory Wars, which is created by Claudio Sanchez, who is the singer for the band. Now, both elements follow the characters Coheed and Cambria, who exist in a science fiction world. The graphic novels provide the core narrative through imagery and text. However, the music provides a poetic and sonic experience of the story. It almost acts like a soundtrack for the graphic novels. And out of their 8 studio albums, only their latest album, titled The Color Before the Sun, is not linked to this story world. Another example is Defiance, which consists of a TV series and a tie-in video game. Both are set in the same post-apocalyptic world. The show sets the narrative, whereas the game allows for interactive exploration of smaller subplots that linked to the larger narrative. And recently, the films such as the Lego Movie in 2014 and the Lego Batman movie, which is released this year, have created a narrative world for an existing range of toys. So now we've talked a little bit about transmedia storytelling. What problems can you see with it? Pause here and write down some answers, and then we'll explain them in a moment. One limitation of transmedia storytelling is that it can demand a large amount of the audience's time, money, and effort. Therefore, it's important to design each element within a transmedia franchise so that it can be enjoyed on its own. This means that transmedia entertainment can be enjoyed by a casual audience member or an occasional audience member, or it can be enjoyed by dedicated fans that form loyal communities who like to analyze and discuss the potential of the franchise and all the different connections in between the elements. For producers, though, some of the limitations are that they need to be knowledgeable with other entertainment options, or at least willing to learn and be adaptable. At the same time, transmedia producers need to invest more time and effort in maintaining the overall narrative in terms of consistency and scheduling. So that's the end of the lecture for film and transmedia. Next week, we'll be talking about the music industry.